So employment levels for US-based software developers between the age of 22 and 25 have declined by nearly 20% over the past 3 years. But this isn't the only degree in decline. We're seeing lots and lots of college degrees becoming less and less valuable. They are not leading to new jobs. They're not leading to increased incomes. But what you might not realize is that the reliance on a college education for work is a rather new phenomenon. If we go back to World War II, fewer than 20% of Americans had college degrees. But at this current time, nearly 40% of college degrees. And, you know, we kind of live in this world where if you don't go to college, you're seen as unsuccessful and all your high school buddies might make fun of you. But I gotta say, I think that that whole idea is completely cooked. I think it's completely cooked. You know, so I want to go back in time just a little bit in today's video. By the way, I'm Mark, bringing you a fresh video on AI in the workforce 6 days a week. Make sure you like and subscribe. And the reality is that the way that the world works, global offshoring, artificial intelligence, on-the-job training, we're seeing a big push into the trades. We're seeing another big shift, probably the biggest shift, I think, since the 1980s. So why since 80 years ago in World War II. So listen, why was that the case? Why were people not getting college degrees back then? Well, prior to the World War II, the US economy was more based off physical labor, apprenticeships, and on-the-job training. And then something happened at that time. We'll get back to that in just a moment. But college used to be very, very expensive relative to income. And the universities that you would go to school for were very small and prestigious. Now, contrast that with now, you know, even our most prestigious universities like Harvard University have 20% of their students claiming learning disabilities and needing special treatment on exams. We covered this in a video a couple weeks ago. I'll post a link to it here. This is insane what's happening at college universities. These are not prestigious small institutions anymore. They are completely bloated and fattened with weak-minded people. And I'm sorry to say it, but listen, if you need like a special learning center to take tests and you are at one of the most prestigious, most challenging, difficult colleges in the country, what are we doing? What are we doing? In fact, in that video, this is kind of a little bit going deeper on this. What we found, guys, is that a higher percentage of the students at universities were claiming mental disabilities than at community colleges, which is crazy to me, which is crazy. These should be difficult, elite learning programs, and that's just not what they are anymore. So what happened? After World War II, the GI Bill was introduced, and this included paid tuition and living expenses for the veterans that returned, which I think on paper sounds like a good idea. But what ended up happening was it massively expanded college enrollment after that point. And it turned higher education into kind of like a middle-class norm like we see it today, and not this kind of elite privilege for the doctors and highest, smartest amongst us. It became just kind of like, well, after high school, you go to college, you go to university. That's how you live your life. That's how you get a job. And what happened was, as a result, the US college attendance exploded over the next 25 years post-war. And this also, again, dramatically changed the social expectations of you graduate, now you go to college. And this just got expanded even more in 1965 after the Higher Education Act was cleared. And all of a sudden, loans became widely available. And as a result, these loans ballooned tuition and administrative spending just got completely bloated. I mean, we see cases where there's 4 administrators to 1 teacher in some circumstances. And the biggest problem with this, guys, and I'm not against people getting educated. I think that's a good thing. I went to community college, I went to university, I went to trade school. I've done a bunch of different things. But the reality is that the cost of tuition has completely skyrocketed. And when you see things like these software engineers and software developers getting out of school, not being able to find work, you kind of start to ask yourself, well, what is the point of the university in the first place? The university should be preparing you for the workforce. University should be preparing you so that you can actually get a job and feed your family and change the world, impact the world in some different ways. So what happened was, as a result of these loans becoming more and more accessible, right? More inclusive, I guess you could maybe even say. Well, the tuition has risen 3 to 4 times faster than the CPI. And student loan debt has now surpassed 1.7 trillion. And here's the deal, guys. These colleges get paid regardless of whether you're successful as a student or not. They don't necessarily have an incentive to make sure that you have a great experience. They have an incentive to make sure that you sign the paperwork and take out the loan. That's the problem. It's kind of like you're buying something with no, I don't want to say guarantee, but there's almost no incentive for them to actually give you the job. Their incentive is so that you have to buy new books. I don't know about you guys, but when I was in college, you couldn't just like go to and buy the book from last year. You had to buy the new book. You had to buy the new book. And the books were essentially the same. And those college books are crazy expensive. Why? Because they know they're getting paid for off of grants and college loans. You're not going to go to Barnes and Noble's and buy a $400 macroeconomics book. Nobody does that. But now after college, you get all these textbooks. By the way, these textbooks become almost irrelevant as soon as you graduate. Like, for all my guys out there that went to college, do you have like a bunch of college textbooks on your bookshelf? I don't know anybody that does. Because you get them, you sell them back for a fraction of what you paid for them, and then the next schmuck has to go in and buy them. It's such a scam. And by the way, I get that all this stuff is changing very, very rapidly. And I think, so on that case, you could, kind of devil's advocate say, well, the curriculum changes and new technology comes out. Okay, sure, great. But at the end of the day, why do I even need a textbook anymore? Guys, the reality is that the internet, artificial intelligence, YouTube, there's so many different ways to learn and educate yourself now that I just don't fully get the whole university thing. And the reality is that, these college degrees are so expensive, and they're just not giving the result on the back end as we see with unemployment numbers. The internet, global offshoring, we didn't even touch on this in too much detail today, but the other thing that's happened is offshoring has become so ubiquitous as well. It's very, a lot of these companies, you get a degree in software engineering, and a company like Microsoft, for example, might just hire someone on an H-1B visa. They might offshore, they're upskilling these other people from other countries, which, mazel tov, that's their own prerogative. One of the things I reported on a couple of weeks ago, and I'll post a link to this video here, is that Microsoft is planning to upskill 20 million Indians. And, again, mazel tov. That's their prerogative. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. But what I do have a problem with is, the companies going offshore to essentially undercut labor costs here in the United States. But people in the United States are still the ones fitting these bills. I mean, I've seen an estimate that it can cost up to $500,000 to get your college degree, between housing, the degree, the diploma, all the different books and amenities and all that. It's $500,000. And by the way, that debt is not expungible from your record. Even if you file for bankruptcy, that debt is not going anywhere. I mean, I see cases where people are paying $1,000 a month just to cover the interest, and they're like, on these loans. It's absolutely insane to me. So something's going to have to be done. There has to be some sort of reckoning. I think it, again, is going to start at an employer level, in people employ, not just saying like, in the past, you can't even get an interview if you don't have a master's degree or a bachelor's degree. You cannot even get an interview. And that, honestly, it just needs to stop. It just needs to stop. I don't know what you think about this, but when I started to look at the numbers and see how much the debt has ballooned, how much the applicants have ballooned, I felt like this is an important thing to cover, because at the end of the day, we're going to school to educate ourselves. We're sending our kids to school to educate ourselves. And golly, man, I'm spending all this money on my kids' college education to get them ready to invest it day after day after day. And I don't even know if it's gonna matter, because the world is changing so fast. I don't know. You type in the comments what you think below. Appreciate you guys being here. Make today awesome. And I'll catch you in the next video, boys. See ya. Peace.